Well, everybody is reeling this morning. If you have stocks and shares ISAs, don't look. If you've got a pension, don't look. You know, all of that, because we wonder how that affects us immediately, but actually where our pensions go, our investments, our savings, are in a lot of American companies and British companies too. But it's a bad morning.
It's a terrible morning. It's not just about what's happening to consumers. It's about what's going to happen to the world economy. We are talking about potential recession. We're talking about potentially, even though the UK has been hit with a lower percentage of tariffs versus other countries from America, we are potentially talking about Rachel Reeves having to come back and ask us for more tax. So it's not just about our long-term investment. It's about what's going to happen in the short term. But also, the president's just upended everything that we've understood about the global order, everything that we've understood about what makes markets work and what brings prosperity. And he seems to be lauding this as a great achievement, Liberation Day.
So why is he doing it then? Because all the analysts will say he's got this wrong. This is going to be bad, not just for the world, but for his own population. He's not a stupid man. I mean, he knows enough. But why? What is he really doing this for then? He genuinely doesn't believe this is going to be immediately good for the economy.
So I think he's always played to his base, OK? And a lot of people who don't understand what a tariff is think that this protectionist route that he's taking means that they are somehow going to protect American jobs and American industry. And that is what you use a tariff for. You use a tariff because you don't want imports coming in from something else, because you want your own domestic industry to prosper. So far, most people, a lot of people watching this programme would agree with that. But the implications of a tariff are huge, not least for businesses that people are invested in, but also because the prices go up for consumers as well. So ultimately, tariffs are bad for your own population. Now, not everybody's an economist. I'm certainly not an economist. And so explaining that is difficult. And it might be that the president's decided that he just wants to have that media win rather than the substantive win.
Are we very happy?
Well, I think a few Conservative MPs are spinning it this morning as a Brexit bonus. I'm sure Mel Stride will say that shortly when you speak to him. But you could also argue it's the Taliban bonus, because it's the same tariff that's been applied to Afghanistan as we've received. So, any way you'd like to spin it, I'm sure there's a positive somewhere.
Let's just dig into that, though. The Brexiteers will claim, and I think it's Andrew Griffiths who said, he feels like he's been vindicated. He's the shadow business secretary. That they're claiming that if we were part of the EU, we would be suffering 20% tariffs. The fact that we've only got 10% tariffs. Are they right?
But within that sentence, does he say that also we have a surplus with the US? So we actually, we receive more from the US than actually we trade with them, and we broke with our, largest trading partner that was on our border. So, how much was wiped off of GDP when we left the EU? It was around 4%, right? How much is this tariff going to affect us? Rather nominally, really, if we actually think about it in context. What I'm worried about, though, and why I don't like the speed at which, perhaps, that Trump has implemented these tariffs, but I do think this could be a good moment for Salma to look around and think about our industry here in the UK, particularly at steel. I've been down in Port Talbot, well, several times, actually, over the last couple of years, where there's been 2,000 job losses, and that's because the government decided we didn't want to make steel anymore. Actually, Trump's vision for bringing back manufacturing is actually pretty good for the domestic population. I would quite like to see that sort of thinking here.
Salma, look, former Conservative special advisor. When the Tories were in government, the thing they said from 2017 onwards, from Boris Johnson right through to Rishi Sunak and all the prime ministers we had in between, name them if you can, look, was a free trade deal with America is our #1 priority. That's what we're going to do. Quote after quote after quote. Well, frankly, they failed us. And now we're paying the price for that, aren't we? A complete failure to negotiate a free trade deal post-Brexit with the USA.
Yeah, and it was never going to be possible, because even...
Well, that wasn't what we were told.
But even at the time, lots of people were saying that having a free trade deal with America is actually going to be incredibly difficult. So politicians do this all the time. I mean, Starmer's going to be... I would say... set expectations higher than they can deliver.
Very, very politically set there,
but this government's going to do that as well. And so the idea that you can walk in and just negotiate with the US, especially with this president, I think is going to be incredibly difficult. And now we're going to look at a list of retaliatory tariffs as well that are coming down the track. And so how is that going to impact our relationship? I mean, it's going to make for an interesting state visit when Trump does come over to meet the king. And I wonder what's going to be on the agenda there if we are actually thinking about
Can
this.
I just list some of
Sure.
the...
Please do.
There's been this government list, 417-page document of potential products that the government might consider for inclusion in any tariff. So we've got bourbon whiskey, motorcycles, guitars, Levi jeans, I think they mean, whale meat, chopsticks, toilet paper, maracas, condoms, and loose seats.
Sounds like a great weekend.
Quick overnight bag.
That's right.
Quick overnight
I
bag.
don't want any
That's a
more
great night
American
out.
maracas. Thank you very much.
I mean, we're not, because it does seem a bit comical in many ways. It's just sort of so bizarre for us to be drawing up this list. But I thought we weren't... I thought, you know, look, a trade war with the USA is a bad idea. You know, we'd never know what Trump's going to do next, you know, and Trump said, if you offer me something phenomenal, who knows? You know, he can change his mind like that.
What are we
going to do?
What are we going to offer?
Tech. We could have taxed tech. That's what we could have done. We've got, you know, all of these social media companies. All, you know, you've got Google, you've
And
got
the
Meta,
rumour
all
is
operating
that
here.
they're not going to go ahead with that, with this digital
Services
tax on your Apples and your Amazons, and they think that Rachel Reeves is going to pull back on that as part of whatever deal she might try and get.
But that's silly though, because the states have a digital services tax. So why would we not do something that the US has itself?
But this is the point.
But you've got to stand up to them now.
But this is the point, though, isn't it? That has the UK got any power now? I mean, you can argue when we were part of the EU, one of the biggest unions, economic unions in the world, we had a bit of clout, we had a bit of power. Literally, we are now working out what is it? What does Trump want from us now? What is the thing he's going to say? Well, you've got to take chlorinated chicken. Are we going to say yes to that? We're going to take their beef. What is it? The power is all with Trump, and there's an argument, isn't it, that Trump is doing this purely for that. I mean, we know that he admires Putin from afar. He admires these big authoritarian leaders. Is this just really a power game to go, well, you know, he thinks America can ride whatever comes their way, and he's just going to throw his weight around and ask for loyalty, demand loyalty from people. If I don't get your loyalty, then I'm going to punish you.
Well, this is the whole sort of thesis behind him forcing us to spend 5% of our GDP on defence, you know. He's shaking up in everything that we know to be, the order that we've always known. And I think the impact on the US is going to be pretty harsh as well. So he can throw his weight around. And yes, you know, we're a minnow. Even the EU as a bloc, you know, doesn't have as much negotiating power as America as a bloc itself around trade deals. So he can throw his weight around, but ultimately, when the backlash comes, it will be severe, and it will be severe for the US economy, just as it is everywhere else. And also, it's all well and good, you know, having tariffs against terrible imports, you know, perhaps even Chinese steel. The US has always had big tariffs against Chinese steel, for example. But it's one thing to do that. It's another thing to put tariffs on your allies and your friends. And these are not the actions of a friend.
No. We're going to talk, obviously, to Mel Stride, the shadow Chancellor, who's just waiting in the wings to come on in a moment. But one of the upsides, well, the Eye is reporting today, Ava, is that one of the silver linings, please let there be something, is that if you have a mortgage, certainly a variable rate mortgage, maybe not if you're in the middle of a fixed one, but our interest rates could be coming down as a way to sort of loosen up our pockets somewhere, because if prices are going to go up in the shops and our mortgage rates stay where they are, then we're likely to head into a recession. So maybe, is that a silver lining?
I'm not really sure how they calculated that, to be honest, today. But I mean, that, you know, we've also got to take this in context. Perhaps, you know, if you are on a variable interest rate, you know, and that does come down, you've also got to deal with your bills going up. So we've just had, you know, energy bills go up, your water bills gone up. You've got companies around the country now warning that prices are going to go up. I think it was QuickFit who's out this morning saying that they're going to have to increase their prices because of the increase in national insurance. So perhaps you might get a little bonus off your mortgage, but you've got this entire other cloud of prices that are heading your way.
Yeah, and that is, you know, politics is, as you well know, it's about timing often, isn't it? And timing can be cruel, you know. Was Rachel Reeves incredibly short-sighted? We knew that this tariff thing was somewhere in the ether. We didn't know what, we didn't know how much, we didn't know when, you know, that sort of thing. But to slap on employers' national insurance increase now, and now this, on top of that, for businesses. I mean, what do businesses... If you export anything to America, as a British business and you've got employees, I mean, honestly, you'd wake up thinking, will I have a job by this time? But, you know, by this time next year, by the end of the year. I mean, with the best will in the world, can they afford to keep me on?
Yeah, and that's exactly the problem, because we are... So growth will go to zero. And
well, it's already being downgraded, isn't it?
Exactly. And so are we going to be in negative territory at some point? But more than that, there are people in this country who have staked years of their lives building up small businesses, employing people. We are a nation of small businesses, actually. And there are a lot of these that are going to be forced to close. So, you know, if the government wants to say that they've gotten a great deal, or even opposition MPs want to say they've gotten a great deal from having 10% tariffs versus the EU, tell that to the person who's thinking about looking down the barrel of closing their business.
And already we know that so many businesses stop dealing in the EU because they just can't afford all the paperwork and all the legislation.
This is not...
post-Brexit,
This is not a win.
And spare a thought, you know, like, look, you have to look around the world. Spare a thought for the effect on some of the other countries. Some of the war-torn countries face some of the steepest tariffs. Cambodia, where they say just under 20%, about 18% of the population live below the poverty line, they have now been faced with a tariff rate of 49%. Last week on this show, we had the breaking news of the earthquake in Myanmar. We got up the next day and realised 1,000 people plus are dead. They're recovering from it. They have just been given the news, less than a week after that devastating earthquake, that they will be facing a 44% tariff. I mean, this does not sound like a world leader who really does care very much about what's going on in the world, other than the finances in his own pocket and his country's pocket, which is to some extent valid.
And it's a triple hit for them as well. A triple hit for them, because first Trump took away all of the money that he was sending over there to begin with, because already Myanmar was war-torn. And then he also didn't offer too much cash during the earthquake. They've been hit by the earthquake. We've only given them around £10 million. And now you've got this on top.
You mean the USA? Do you mean the cut in...
Sorry, the cut in what the US is giving to other countries.
Yes.
Well, no, we're going to cut this because I think we believe that Mel Stride is actually now with us. We will come back to you both in a second. Mel Stride, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Good morning.
What's your takes on this 10% tariff? We've just been discussing here in the studio how the Conservative government, your government, was very confident we would have this US free trade deal. That seems like a thing of the past. It's impossible. Brexit has already been an absolute calamity. A lot of people saying, analysts are saying, for this country. This is just making things a hell of a lot worse, isn't it?
Well, look, nobody wants what may become a world trade war, and nobody wants the kind of high tariffs that the United States have brought in and are announcing. I mean, that's going to have huge consequences for people's livelihoods, prices around the world, growth and jobs. When we were in office, actually, you mentioned our time in office, we got very close to concluding a trade deal with the Trump administration. You'll remember it took us some time to conclude Brexit, and we couldn't actually do that deal until we were out of the European Union. What we've seen from this government, I think, is a flat-footedness in terms of the negotiations they've conducted to date. It took them over 4 months, actually, to get the business secretary, our business secretary, in front of his opposite number. They've also they fired Crawford Faulkner, who was a sort of lead negotiator and had done all that early work back in the first Trump term, changed the ambassador in Washington from Karen Pierce, who was very well connected to a political appointee. So we need them to speed up, really.
Well, yeah, I mean, you say speed up. Boris Johnson in 2017 said, "We hear that we're first in line to do a great trade deal with the US." Liz Truss, 2019, "My main priority will now be agreeing a free trade deal with the US." She only had 49 days to do it, but there you go.
Well, that's true. That's not
Dominic Raab then said, "President Trump has made it clear again that we want an ambitious trade agreement with the UK." Rishi Sunak, 2023, "For a while now, it's not been a priority either for the US or UK." Right, so you're saying that this government's been flat-footed. That may well be true, but you had 14 years. You had many, many years after we left the EU to sort this out. Isn't partly the problem that you failed us?
So there was a lot that we did achieve, actually. We got memos of understanding, trade arrangements with 8 US states in that time. But to your point, bear in mind that the Biden administration, when they came in and we had COVID going on at the same time, took a really strong, conscious decision that they were not going to pursue a trade agreement. So I think the background or the trading or our negotiating partner at that point fundamentally changed. What we've got now is a president that is up for a trade deal, that we got a substantial amount of progress done when he was last in office, so that is there to be built on. But as I say, we have had a government here that didn't get in the room quickly enough in terms of trying to seal that deal. And I think it would have been possible to have done that and to have avoided what's happened on the 10%.
Mel Stride, you voted Remain in 2016 in the referendum. What have you seen in almost 10 years that tells you that you were still wrong to do that? And you think, well, actually, we were right to leave. What have you seen? Tell people at home now, sitting having their breakfast. What is the thing that you've seen? Actually, things are better.
Having their breakfast. Well, we were an absolute world leader when it came to getting the vaccine developed and rolled out, and I think that was a direct benefit of having freedoms from the European Union. I think you're also seeing some benefits now. The fact that we are, or people are, discussing what our response should be to the United States, whether we should bring in retaliatory tariffs or not, is only a discussion we can have.
That's a benefit of Brexit, is discussing retaliatory tariffs with the US.
No, what I said was the flexibility. So the European Union will do what the EU does, and it will probably respond with reciprocal tariffs. As we are not part of the European Union, we can either follow that, which I think is very unlikely, or we can not do anything at all or do something in between. And that is a direct freedom that comes because we're in control of our trading arrangements. But back to your question, there's also, having left the European Union, of course, we've conducted and concluded multiple trade deals right across the world, not least in the Asia-Pacific area, where the world economy is growing fastest of all. So there have definitely been benefits that I can point to.
Yes, thank you so much, Mel Stride. We'll leave it there with you for now. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Yeah, benefits, but they don't add up to a huge amount, do they, given the knock-on effect of Brexit? I mean, those deals that he's talking about there, 0.3% with New Zealand, you boost to the UK, 0.8% of that Australia deal, it doesn't add up.
It doesn't supplement what we would have had with the EU. I mean, we still trade with the EU. There's just elements of friction that existed now that didn't exist previously. There's elements of kind of labour market movements in terms of freedom of movement that don't exist. But there's one thing that we do have to say that I think Mel Stride is right on, which is the complexion of what the US was doing as far as trade deals were concerned did change under Trump, Biden, and now Trump again, because the EU was due to have a trade deal in the form of TTIP, which also doesn't exist. So I think we've got to be careful that we don't apply too much of the Brexit question, which, you know, is legitimate, on what's happening in the US, because the US treats everybody differently.
I mean, he calls it the freedom, but it does indicate how alone we are now. And you put so much focus on the US, and you don't know what the US is going to do, and things are volatile when you get someone like Trump.
Look, I absolutely agree with that. We don't have the comfort of being part of that bigger market anymore. That is true.
Yeah. Ava, can we talk about... let's leave tariffs there. We've only got a short amount in this bit left. There's a report that says, we're talking about dentistry, we talk about that on this show a lot. We have a lot of people who say, I've pulled out my own teeth, my kids can't get NHS treatment. It's a nightmare out there. There was a dental recovery plan. Apparently it's made things worse. I mean, honestly.
So this was introduced by the Conservatives last year, and it was, I think it's around £80 million that's been spent on this recovery plan, and actually appointments have gone down by 3%, which is rather extraordinary. But what's interesting is when Labour actually put down their manifesto, they pledged that they were going to fix children's teeth. This was going to be part of their community hub programme. They were going to have this as sort of like a holistic approach to health. And not a lot has been done in that time. I think the only thing that's been introduced in some schools is that we're now teaching children to brush their teeth. But aside from that, it hasn't got any easier to get an appointment.
What is the answer here? Because there are so many dentists who are just going, just going to do a bit of cosmetic, you know, fillers and things, because it pays better, and I'll do maybe one day in the NHS. I mean, that's truly what's happening. People, you know, these dentists have spent thousands of pounds training themselves up for this and getting into debt, but you know, all of that.
Purse, you know, the public purse did train them as well.
The public purse trained them. Do we need to change their contracts to sort of make them stay in the NHS for 5 years after they graduate? I don't know.
That's what the NAO is saying. So the National Audit Office that produced this report that says this project did not fulfil its ambition is saying that you do need to change the dental contract. And, you know, I know from previous experience in government is that student loans that pay for medics, you know, quite often you give people the loan, and what they do is they train up and then they leave.
Yes, well, they do. All right, super stuff. Thank you, Salma. Thank
we
you,
are speaking
Ava.
to James Murray from the Treasury later, and we'll get your response to that. Now, the sister of a man killed by a reckless driver who was speeding, drunk and high on drugs, says tougher legal rules could have prevented the tragedy which took her brother's life.
Tim Burgess died after the car that he was travelling in, he was a passenger at the time, was struck head-on by a man travelling more than 65 miles per hour on the wrong side of the road. Now, 10 days before this, the same driver that killed Tim had crashed into a stationary vehicle when he'd also been intoxicated with drink and drugs. But remarkably, he was allowed to drive again whilst he was on bail.
Tim's sister, Lindsay Stewart, is calling on the government to toughen the laws around dangerous driving, and she's with us now alongside Chris Seaton, who is advocating for better drug drive testing. Lindsay, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
It must be really, I mean, to lose your brother in such a way has got to be horrific, but to know that one fairly straightforward decision could have prevented it, and you know, it could have stopped what happened. That must be quite hard to accept.
Well, when we found out that, excuse me, Tim was killed by a repeat offender, we just felt horrified. Why was this man not remanded in custody? Why didn't he have any bail conditions placed on him? And why did he still have a driving licence? It's just absolutely shocking.
So just tell us what actually happened then. So where was Tim going and what actually happened that day?
Tim was going with his girlfriend to buy a new car. He was in the passenger seat, she was driving, plodding along quite slow, and the offender came on their side of the road, overtook a van on a blind bend and smashed straight into them head on. And Tim died within about a minute of multiple injuries. So yeah, just Wendy, his girlfriend, had serious injuries which she's still recovering from.
And he was a dad?
He was a dad, a 15-year-old daughter who's just doing her GCSEs. She's working really hard to make him proud.
Yeah. And so tell us, when were you told about the history of the driver who had killed your brother?
I think it was a couple of months later because the police can't disclose everything to us.
And what did they say?
They just said that he had had a crash 10 days previously and our jaws just dropped. Why was he on the road? Tim's death was completely preventable, especially with him having a previous conviction in 2021 of drug driving as well. So you've got a repeat offender here. And you're hearing these stories all the time at the moment in the news of people being bailed after dangerous driving, and really something needs to be done. We're calling
and so revoking a licence at that point, if somebody's I mean, it seems like this person had a death wish, either for himself or others, right? He's a totally reckless human being, really, out of control person. So revoking a licence even after one incident, I suspect might not have stopped this person from getting behind a wheel again. What is the law change that you're looking for? And we'll come to you in a moment, Chris, about how what you do fits into what you want, Lindsay.
Well, the reason why he was free to get back behind the wheel is because the police have to wait for a blood test result sample to come back from the lab if they're positive for drugs at the side of the road.
So drink drive, you can get the breathalyzer test.
Yeah.
But for drugs, there isn't one roadside.
For drugs, they have to wait for the test result to come back from the lab. So they're free to get back behind the wheel while they're waiting for the result of the blood test. So he got back behind the wheel and Tim is dead because of it. So in France and Australia, they have a system with an evidential saliva sample test where they take the sample at the side of the road, and if it's positive, the offender can be charged and prosecuted within 2 or 3 days.
Where is this? This is
France and Australia, much far better system, which we could really do with that in this country. Do you think we could get that here, Chris?
Yeah, well, that's what we're asking for. I think that Lindsay just mentioned that evidential saliva, and at the moment you take a roadside screen which is saliva-based. You then have to go, if you're positive, you go back to the police station to have your bloods taken. That process can take up to 6 months, and the suspect is able to drive during that period. So you've got someone on the road that's suspected of drink driving. Once the bloods come back, you can then go through the court and you can be charged, and you lose your licence for a minimum of 12 months. Saliva, as Lindsay just said, is used in Australia and France. That process, the process of actually analysing saliva is a lot quicker and easier than bloods.
And equally reliable? Is it?
Yes,
yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, forensically as secure as blood. And and as Lindsay said, it's successful in Australia and France, and very small number of reoffending in both of those countries.
Because the justice process is sped up, essentially.
Indeed, absolutely.
So are you saying that what should have happened is that perhaps this test was done and then they put him behind bars there and then, awaiting an appearance in front of a judge within the next 48? Is that what you're saying? What are you going to be... Because you have actually been in contact with the Home Office, haven't you? Tell us what happened yesterday.
I've written to the Home Secretary asking this critical issue to be debated in Parliament, and she responded to me late last night saying that I'm invited to discuss it with the Policing Minister about law changes regarding dangerous drivers.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what exactly they would be, whether that would be revoking licences, remanding offenders until they're dealt with at the time so they don't become repeat offenders.
So keeping them behind bars until the results of those tests come back, or that they go in front of a court? I mean, because we know the justice system is slow and our prisons are full, so there'll be a lot of pushback. Morally, of course, people will be on your side, but one will wonder how on earth
Well, if this offender had been dealt with 10 days previously, possibly had a short jail sentence or his punishment, Tim would still be alive. He wouldn't be in jail now for 12 years. All the lives wouldn't be destroyed if he'd have been dealt with at the time.
Tags, curfews...
Yeah, just something.
And just give me the example of what happens briefly in Australia and France. What is it actually done there?
Yeah, so the saliva sample is sent away for laboratory testing in the same way that our bloods are in the UK. That comes back a lot quicker, and then they're able to charge the driver and remove that driver from the roads. It's exactly what we need here in the UK. We need to speed the system up.
Yeah.
And we have to be very proportionate and realistic about, how quickly we can do that, but we can do it a lot quicker than we are doing presently. And just to point out that in the last 10 years, there's 33,000 drug drivers that have reoffended. 3,500 of those have reoffended 4 or more times, and 54 of those have reoffended 10 or more times. So the deterrent is clearly not there. It's just clearly something that people just think they can get away with.
Chris, thank you so much. And Lindsay, we say this all the time, but it's so brave of you to come on and talk about this. You must miss Tim incredibly.
Terribly. I'm one of 5, very close, large family, and we all miss him beyond words.
Well, look, you're doing him proud, and what you're doing now is in his honour and in his name, and I think it's amazing, and good luck.
I wish his daughter well.
Thank you.
It's very difficult. She's got a loving family around her. So.
Thank you, she has.
Yeah, good.
In a statement, the Department of Transport said there are already strict penalties in place for those who are caught drug driving. We are working closely with policing partners to improve efficiency while ensuring the integrity of results that support prosecutions. Our roads are among the safest in the world, but we are committed to improving road safety.
Yeah, it's not necessarily the penalty, it's the speed of getting there, isn't it, that you're wanting to shorten that time. Now, look, if you've been affected by any of the issues we've been discussing, you can find advice and support at itv.com/help.
With the US tariffs, what are you concerned about the most in terms of what tariffs Trump has imposed?
It's an interesting day, isn't it? Because I work for Politics Joe and we cover news for younger people. So a lot of the concerns that are in the papers today aren't concerns of viewers of our channel, because most of those people are under 35 and it's unlikely that they have a house that they own. It's unlikely that they have investments, and they are already subject to many global headwinds and actually even domestic headwinds. They're not really sort of at the forefront of enjoying themselves financially at this moment in time. So for them, I suppose, it just sort of feels like, well, it's another hit in a slew of about 20 slaps that they've already received this year. But I mean, in terms of I guess what we should be worried about, it sort of depends on how the UK is going to react to these tariffs. So one industry that will be impacted, and actually will impact young people because they'll work in this industry, is the steel industry. And so Trump has imposed these tariffs because he's concerned about certain steel that is coming into the US, even though there's quite high tariffs already on Chinese steel. He's imposed those tariffs, which means in return, it's likely that we're going to have a whole load of Chinese steel dumped in the UK market. Now, what does that mean for places like Port Talbot, where we make steel? It's not great. It means that manufacturers will now buy that cheaper steel rather than buying our wonderful British diamond steel. And that will have a rather dramatic effect on industry here for quite some time unless Starmer retaliates.
Cool, great, thank you. And in terms of travel to the US, do you think the fact that Trump's imposed these tariffs, do you think that will change anything? Like, do you think British people still travel to the US?
I mean, one thing that we're hearing a lot when we're out talking to young people is that people are rather uncomfortable about how Trump is approaching LGBTQ, how he is approaching DEI. Those sort of things don't really align with young people's values. But then you've got this entire other cohort of younger people, the people who are being persuaded by reform, who are very into the MAGA, Make America Great Again movement. And actually that is persuading them to go there. But in terms of financials, it doesn't really tend to affect people who are under 35. I mean, the exchange rate is still, I think it was $1.31 to a pound. So, I mean, it's not really going to affect your holiday. It's about the same as it was after Brexit. But in terms of sort of the morality of going to the US at the moment, I think young people have questions.
Okay, great. And what do you mind if I just ask you one last
Yeah.
question about what tariffs do you think the UK will impose on the US in retaliation to Trump's tariffs?
I don't think the UK is going to impose any tariffs. I know that they are consulting businesses as we speak, but I'd be very surprised if any tariffs actually went in the coming days. What I would like to see is a regulation of the tech industry. I would love to see a digital services tax, money that is, big social media companies like Meta, X, Google being forced to pay tax in the UK. I think that would be a really great way to do a retaliation without being aggressive, because at the moment those companies are sort of de facto deregulated our online services industry here. It's very dangerous for young people and it's harmful to the exchequer.
Now, it's an extraordinary day. President Donald Trump has said Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer was very happy with a 10% tariff on British exports to the US, which was lower than many had expected in our European neighbours who face a 20% tariff.
However, the government has drawn up a list of potential items from the US which could be slapped with a retaliatory tariff, such as jeans, as in jeans that you wear, bourbon whiskey, motorcycles, all sorts of things. So how do we plan to respond? With us now from Westminster is Exchequer Secretary James Murray. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
I mean, the world is trying to grapple with each individual country's response to this. Are we very happy with how we've been treated on tariffs?
Well, the Prime Minister set out yesterday when he met businesses how the government is responding to what has happened in terms of tariffs. You know, President Trump has acted in line with his electoral mandate. The Prime Minister here is acting in line with his mandate, sort of keeping a cool head, making sure we retain a pragmatic approach, because what businesses are telling us is that they don't want a trade war. They want us to secure an economic deal. That's the economic deal that we've been negotiating on intensively since the Prime Minister's visit to Washington earlier in the year. And we need to keep up that negotiation to secure a deal, because that's the best way to mitigate the impact of tariffs. We know that the changes will have an impact here and around the world, and we want the best for British businesses.
So when you say we are sort of still negotiating that deal, ultimately, he's set the benchmark now, hasn't he? He said, look, there's a tariff, 10%. If you want to get a better deal, you're going to have to come with me with something. He's already said he needs something phenomenal. What are we going to say yes to? What is it? What is it that we're going to have to accept? Chlorinated chicken, maybe? Hormone beef? I mean, what is it we're going to say yes to?
Well, very specifically on the question more broadly about chlorinated chicken and hormone-treated beef, you know, those are illegal in the UK, and the Prime Minister's been clear that in deals with any countries, those food standards are not up for negotiation. But to make a really important point here, that more broadly, you know, we need to give the negotiators space to negotiate the best deal for the UK, rather than, you know, me or others coming on and commentating about the timelines or about what's in and what's out. We know we need that deal. We're negotiating at pace to get that deal, and that's in the best interest for the UK.
Well, you say at pace. I mean, we had the Shadow Chancellor Mel Stride on, who said that actually this government, your government, has been flat-footed in terms of negotiations to date. He said that why did it take 4 months to get the business secretary in front of his opposite number at the White House? We've now got a president, Mel Stride says, who is up for a trade deal, and lots of progress was done, and actually you haven't built on that since July. Why?
Look, I think everyone would acknowledge that the reason why we are having these negotiations about an economic deal to mitigate the impact of tariffs on the UK is because of the Prime Minister's visit to Washington earlier this year, and because of the relationship that he has built with President Trump, and because of the strength of the relationship between the US and the UK. That's why we're having these negotiations. Now, we need to develop those negotiations. We want to get to a deal, because that's the way to both mitigate the impact of the tariffs and to make the relationship between the UK and the US stronger, which is in both of our interests.
Would you support British people boycotting American products?
I'm not going to support a boycott, no, because I think the US is our closest ally. We want to strengthen the economic relationship between the UK and the US. You know, we want to get a deal so that we can mitigate the impact of tariffs which have been announced, and we know that that's in the best interests of businesses here in Britain and of consumers too.
OK. Let's talk about what you are out for this morning. You want to talk about cutting red tape for hospitality and to allow pubs and clubs to open later. I mean, you know, it sounds, yeah, OK, very exciting. But is there research to suggest that people in London or Birmingham or Burnley or whatever, the one thing that they are asking their government to do is, can you make the pub open till a bit later for us, please? Is that really a priority for British people?
Well, I think pubs play a pretty important role in most of our lives, as do clubs, restaurants, all the hospitality venues right across the country. And we want to support them to succeed. And we know that a lot of the bureaucracy around them has become stifling in recent years, which is why we want to change it.
I'll tell you what has been stifling for them is rising wage costs, national insurance contributions, business rates. I mean, those are the things that are stifling the hospitality industry, and that's in your control.
Well, let me be clear about those 2 points that you've raised. So on employer national insurance contributions, we absolutely recognise that the increase there was a tough decision that we took last October, and it means difficult decisions for businesses to respond to that. But the reason why we took that decision was to fund our public services and to get public finances back on a firm footing. And you can see now NHS waiting lists have come down 5 months in a row.
Yeah, but what does that do for the hospitality industry?
But you also mentioned business rates, and this is a really important point, because under the plans that we inherited from the previous government, relief for retail, hospitality and leisure businesses would have ended entirely this month. It would have gone entirely. We are extending it for a further year, giving businesses that extra support. Yeah. And from April 2026, we're going to introduce a permanent tax cut for retail, hospitality and leisure properties on the high street.
It's interesting, though, isn't it? When was the last time you went to the pub?
Me personally?
Yeah, I'm just wondering.
I went a few weeks ago to the Duke of Kent in my constituency, which is a great pub.
Yeah, good advert for them. It's nice. I'm only asking because I just wonder whether one of the actual bigger problems here, not problems, but one of the bigger issues is that, socially speaking, younger people are just going out less. They're going to the pub less. People are choosing to drink less, I think. And I just wonder whether you've considered that.
Well, I don't think it's entirely about drinking. I think people can go out to restaurants, they can go out to clubs and not drink, or drink alcohol-free drinks. That's up to people's individual choices. But, you know, going out, socialising, meeting up with people, going to the pub is a core part of British life. It's a core part of our everyday economy, and we want to support it to succeed. And look, we know that through our plan for change, we have implemented changes to the planning system. And those changes to the planning system have helped builders to build more homes and have increased the forecasts for economic growth. We now want to do something similar in terms of licensing to help hospitality venues and the nighttime economy to succeed better too.
James Murray, would you drink bourbon whiskey now?
If I drank whiskey, I would, but I don't. I'm not a big whiskey fan. I'm sorry to admit that.
That's lucky, isn't it? It's an American import.
Can I ask you, the bars in the Houses of Parliament, are they still quite subsidised? I've never been, but I've heard that they're a lot cheaper than pubs out. Is that right?
Yeah, I don't really know. I mean, I've been there a couple of times. I'm not a huge frequenter of the bars there. I think they seem fairly cheap when I go there. But I haven't been there recently. I haven't been there actually. I don't think I've actually been there in this Parliament at all. So I can't give you a good update on that.
Do you think that's fair though? If they're cheaper in the House of Parliament than people are paying out in pubs in their towns and cities?
Well, I don't know what the current prices are. So I don't think I've actually been in this Parliament. I've been in the Treasury mostly.
All right. OK, thanks for joining us, James Murray. We're joined now by former Conservative Special Advisor Salma Shah and Ava-Santina Evans from Politics Joe. So I think the most response we've had to anything we've done so far on the show today is probably the debate on teachers. And, the stats show that I think it's 30%, about a third of secondary school teachers are male. It goes to about 15% at primary school. So that's a real shortfall and certainly not enough male teachers. So the debate is, should we incentivise men to get into teaching or get back into teaching by paying them more, Salma?
I mean, no, is my answer. Yeah. I understand there'll be lots of studies and lots of people saying that you need to get men into teaching for the sake of having role models, male role models for children. First of all, I think it's a bad precedent to set, to say that women in this field are devalued in comparison to men.
Monetarily devalued.
Monetarily devalued, and that somehow that what they contribute to that conversation is less somehow. I don't think that is true, and I don't think that's right. But also, it's not just about male teachers. There is something about, within wider society that is about male role models that actually you can't just fix in a classroom setting.
No, but I think it's one part of it, though, isn't it?
Perhaps,
it's a quick fix, though, isn't it?
I've never seen that.
It's just sort of a quick fix solution. Like the Labour government at the moment are sort of chasing the tail of adolescence, and they're sort of...
Netflix show. And also Gareth Southgate, who happened to be talking about, toxic masculinity and, young boys are being influenced by terrible people online to be misogynists. We have to counter it.
Absolutely, but you don't counter that by putting more male teachers in schools.
Why not?
You need to counter that by regulating the tech industry and not allowing the sort of dangerous social media posts that kids are seeing day in, day out to, fill their screen.
Right, so we've got Saber on X says, my son works so much better under an older male teacher. He says that the female teachers just don't understand boys. We've got Tony on X. He says, my husband's doing his history degree, looking at going into teaching, but he's changed his mind, and I agree, because there is little protection for men. One flippant remark, you've upset a student, and no money would make it worth the risk for him. We've got loads of people saying that they considered being a teacher as a man and then rejected it. We have to change that, don't we? It's not acceptable, is it? Because in the 90s, it was 50-50, essentially, and now it's 2/3 women and 1/3 men. It just can't be right in a co-ed school.
But then one would ask themselves, why have they decided since that period to not become teachers? Is that because there's a general monetary issue around teaching? Is it because it doesn't pay enough or it's not fulfilling enough? And change the whole scope. I just don't think you should pay men more. It just completely pushes back what we're supposed to do on
as you
gender
say,
pay.
I mean, it certainly highlighted issue with pay in teaching. Louise on X says, what an absolute insult to female teaching staff. I thought we were past gender pay gaps. I'm absolutely disgusted with the suggestion to pay men more for simply choosing to teach. What about the female staff who do a fantastic job every day? I mean, the entry level is 31,000, on average is 48,000. There's an argument that doesn't sound like a lot. I mean, teaching is as important as...
And it's stressful.
As medical professions.
Yeah.
And it's sort of... is it in the right salary bracket?
So we should pay teachers more. The fact is, nobody can afford anything at this point in time. So the salary is going to go up as the salary goes up, according to the Independent Pay Commission. I think there's a different issue, though, which is... You're basically saying that only men can teach boys, and that is part of the problem.
No,
I don't think it's that. I mean,
Well, I don't know. My family are teachers, and a lot of my friends are teachers. They're all women, and the role has changed dramatically actually in the last few years, where you're actually a caregiver. You're looking out for children who need to be referred to food banks. You're looking out for children who are being abused because you don't have the social security net that you used to have.
I think it's about having a diversity of thought in a classroom, isn't it? So being taught by women and men, and the idea here is that you're less likely to be taught by a man in school, which I think.
But then I also think that there's sort of that's rather quite traditional gender conformity, right? Because I do think that you might have a female teacher who has rather masculine energy. You might have a male teacher who's got rather the feminine energy. You know, I don't really. I'm not sure it works. Really
One of the
for modern
thoughts,
world.
we move on to something, but what I think is that instead of focusing on graduates at the younger end of the age scale, I do think there's a big call for people in their 50s who retire early, men who have run businesses, who have been in industry, who have worked in banking or whatever, to then go and teach for a year, because you don't necessarily need the money at that stage, and you do it to give back.
Not a bad idea.